Diversity is something that I've been passionate about for forever. I've written here before mobile phones were invented, so just give you a little idea of how old I am. I'm really excited also about the concept of cognitive diversity. I think the recognition that businesses do better when they put their energy into unearthing and celebrating different ways of thinking, different behavioural styles, different cultures. I can't wait to see where this all takes us. So once again, I love the topic, but I wanted to lean across experts and just humbled as ever with the awesomeness of the panel that I hear today. Obviously, Dan, we've just had some time together, but to introduce Dan Wiley as a partner at Flux, we bonded over our diversity soapbox. We've been working with Flux, helping them build a recruitment strategy around diversity. And Dan's really passionate and an ambassador for dyslexia, promoting this as like a superpower and celebrating a different learning and thinking style. Then we got Vanessa Vallely, OBE, and MD of We Are the City. She's both walked the walk with an impressive career in financial services and talked the talk with one of the most powerful and engaging figures on gender equality. You launched We Are the City in 2008, and I think that the impact on promoting women in the city and developing their careers is nothing short of incredible. So proud to have you here with us today. And we've got Anita. Anita Kimber is a partner and transformational leader within financial services at EY. I think I walked in and met Anita about 4 or 5 years ago, and the first question she said to me was, what are your thoughts on diversity? How do we get a diverse team in? Super passionate to her, and she's on a mission to build a better financial services industry, and the lean on what creative thinking and different thinking does is paramount in this mission to her and us. This segues really nicely into the banking industry. We've got Michael Spiteri here. He's become a good friend over the years and a leader at one of the world's biggest banks, HSBC. He's previously held leadership positions at PwC, Accenture and IBM. He's a COO in digital data development teams across the retail bank. Passionate and full of opinion on the topic of diversity. And again, first time we met, that was the first thing you asked me as well, was around diversity and how people bring women in. So great to have you here. Also representing from the banking side, Hardeep Kundan, who's also a very good friend of mine, from Goldman Sachs. She's my education all the time on this topic. So can I say this, Hardeep? That's one of my favourite questions to bring to her. I think you can only echo her passion by her results. Across every business that she's been involved in their recruitment strategy, she's had a direct impact on the diversity within the teams that she's helped to build. And she's a legend in this space. And we felt that we really needed somebody representing Elysian. And as I say every time when I do these webinars, I talk too much to be on the panel. So I've brought in my good friend and person that's worked with me all the way through my recruitment career, Mike Kidd, and he's also a partner at Elysian. Mike's been both in-house and the banking side, building teams at Barclaycard and UBS, and on the agency side with myself and Harvey Nash. So it brings a completely different lens on the need and the push and the drive for recruitment on both sides. So on the note of me talking way too much, I'm going to pass over to Danny, who is back by popular demand to host this event today. He'll bring some order to the events and take you through all the questions. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jem. And first of all, just a little bit about me, if you don't mind. So I have a background in corporate consulting and restructuring mergers and acquisitions as part of the team that came through the bailout of RBS back in 2008, which was an amazing experience. I came out of the corporate rat race about 3 years ago, where I kind of lost my passion for the corporate world. I kind of view at that point was you was measured on the strength of your PowerPoint rather than the strength of what you can deliver. I now lead a company with my business partner called Infusion Group, where we really follow our passion, which is by working with small, medium-sized businesses to change the way they accelerate their business growth by developing exceptional leaders and teams. So it's all about people. It really is an honor to host this event because coming from the corporate world and now working with small to medium-sized businesses, it's amazing how the diversity debate has happened in the corporate world, but there is a significant way to go in the small to medium-sized businesses, actually huge. So I'm proud to be part of this, but also really looking forward to learning from the team here to see what we can bring to our clients as well. So let's kick off with some ground rules. So for our panelists, quick one, if you just raise your hands when you want to make a comment. I know there's going to be many of you that want to jump in, say things in this debate, but let's just bit of etiquette, raise hands. This is being recorded, so just be aware of that. Any questions to attendees, please feel free to post questions in the chat box. There is a Q&A, but just feel free to interact. So let's get onto the agenda. So it's going to be split into a couple of segments. We've got the first one, which is all about cognitive diversity. And then the next one, which is about the impact of diversity in business. We've then got a Q&A, and then there's a networking session at the end that's going to be facilitated by Paul Hamilton. So I think we should just get into the debate. Let's go. So the first section, cognitive diversity. And I'm going to let everyone probably spend a couple of minutes on their views on this one, because I think it's really important. To our panel, what would a more cognitively diverse team to bring to your organization? And I'm going to look at my camera and I'm going to go kind of left to right as my camera is. So the first person I see is Dan Wiley. Do you want to give your views on that, Dan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Danny. And also I just want to say, to kind of echo Gemma's sort of comment, it's humbling to be on a panel of such experience. And I'd kind of sort of say, you know, my experience is sort of quite limited, other than my kind of learned and lived experience. So as Gemma said, I'm a dyslexic, and it's something that I've only very recently sort of been talked about and been open about, because of the stigma that it's had through the majority of my career. And I've been lucky enough to land, you know, in an organisation that actually supports and celebrates sort of that influx. You know, somewhere where I think I've referred to it as sort of my spiritual home. And the reason I call it that is that, you know, we're a consultancy. Our role is to try and help sort of businesses think differently, and naturally I think differently to a good number of people. And I didn't really realise that until sort of joining and starting a business like Flux. And I think, you know, we're consultants, but really as consultants, I think we're creative problem solvers. And in order to kind of solve problems in the most creative way, you need to smash together lots of different ways of processing in information. And, you know, you need to sort of give that the space. You know, one of our sort of core values is to have sort of one diverse team. And sort of, so we're on this kind of constant strive to try and bring different thinkers into the organization, and give them the space to, you know, to be able to sort of thrive. So it's vitally important to us. It's vitally important to our ability to sort of solve problems for our clients. But also it's a kind of job that's never done. And I think that's what's, you know, both sort of fascinating, you know, and sometimes frustrating sort of about it, is we're constantly looking for new ways of diversifying the team, of bringing sort of, you know, fresh perspectives in, and you know, finding new pools of you know, amazing creative minds that we can tap into.
Brilliant. And Anita, what's your take on this?
So I love the fact that we're comparing experience here. So I feel very experienced because I'm very old. And Danny, I you know, your comment about losing passion about the corporate world, I think is systematic of not having diverse teams. If we talk about what diverse teams bring to an organization, if I think about it personally, I know I get really low when I'm in a room full of the same type of thinkers doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you just feel like you're on a treadmill. And that challenge and that diversity, and that comes from all of the usual suspects, in terms of, you know, whether that's dyslexia, or whether that's a different nationalities or different genders. You know, I'm lucky to work in consulting and we get access to that, and it makes it more fun. You know, at the end of the day, you want to go to work and have some passion about it. If I think about it from a business perspective as well, I'm not one who says, you know, you've got to create a business case for diversity. you don't. Diversity is just the right thing to do. You shouldn't have a business case for it. But what I think from a consultant's perspective, we do our clients a disservice when we don't turn up with a diverse team. Our clients aren't homogeneous. You know, our clients have different views of business models. You've got a traditional view, you've got a disruptive view, you've got people who are comfortable with change, who aren't comfortable with change. And unless we turn up with diverse thinking, then we can't help them change, because we simply reflect them. So it's critical for fun and passion, but it's actually critical to get the right result.
Absolutely. It sounds. I can relate a lot to that from the corporate days myself. And Vanessa, in your space, where do you see, because you're seeing from probably more of an outside view as well?
So again, I'm going to relate to your comment, Dan, and to Anita's. I mean, one of the reasons I set up We Are the City was the lack of diversity in the room. You know, being the only woman around my senior leadership team, great guys, but their challenges were different than mine. Also looking at the women that worked for me at the time were from different diverse backgrounds. And when I looked at it from a leadership perspective, there was nobody from a diverse background. I mean, I was coming at it from more, I expect, social mobility, you know, having kind of left school at 16 and not gone to college or university. But that lack of diversity in the room was kind of what was most frustrating to me, which is why I wanted to shine a spotlight on women and the talents that they've got. But also, I think another thing is from, you know, back to Anita's point, that diversity of thought in the room, right? It does contribute towards your bottom line. I mean, again, just to give you another example, in 2008, when all the markets fell, I was the only one in that leadership team that had experience of motivating people with no money, because I'd grown up in that environment. So all of a sudden, my voice was heard louder in that room, because everyone else had a textbook model of how we would motivate thousands of staff whilst cutting jobs, taking away bonuses, cutting salaries. All of a sudden I had a voice, and that voice was because I was diverse and I had a different set of experiences. So I think never underestimate the power of that diversity of thinking in the room. You know, in an ideal world, we would all go out and, you know, recruit those diverse people, but sometimes you work in pockets or areas where that's just not possible, but it's not impossible. You know, from our perspective, even as a small company, we make sure that our consultants in London or those that are attending our events are from diverse backgrounds, you know, that are constantly feeding in what, you know, how do we make sure that we're a more inclusive organisation? So I think at the forefront of anyone's mind, you know, it isn't, we can all throw the diversity word in there, but it's about being inclusive from the offset, you know. And I know we're going to talk about it later, but where are you hiring? Once you hire people from different backgrounds, how are you nurturing their careers? Where do they see role models in the top of their organizations so that they can aspire to those big positions? So it's a journey, and it's a journey everyone's on, and no one's got right yet. We've a way to go in terms of society. But I think the first thing is to have that, you know, in your mindset around everything you do. That inclusion lens is really, really important. Then we'll see the true diversity of what everyone brings to the table. We'll serve our clients better, we'll grow better as individuals, and we'll grow our companies.
Well said. It's well said, Vanessa. And Michael, in an organisation that is, you know, I guess the Titanic in itself, of HSBC, how are you looking at it from an organisation of that size?
So I think the thing you have to do, we've got a long way to go. I mean, this is a brilliant panel, as Gemma said, and is indicative of where we're at, but we've got a hell of a long way to go. So number one is modeling the right behaviors. And like Anita, I'm old enough to remember, and I could pick up on 2 or 3 things. So I'm still on the rat, you know, the rat race, or the hamster wheel, as you call it. So thanks for that. And I want to pick up on what Anita said. I think it's bang on. When you're in a big environment, when you walk into a room, it has a different energy and a different buzz, number one. And you don't want to be confronted with or have to deal with people who think uniformly. Why are we all moving to things like enterprise agile, not software development in an agile way? Because we recognize an experience, and I'm going to take a slightly different view to some of the questions today, Dan, because I, you know, either fortunately or unfortunately, I'm married to a psychotherapist. And when I look into that world, everything, and we all know how hard change is, everything about change is understanding people and people dynamics. And cognitive diversity is a very important lens to that. From a personal perspective, in, you know, picking up on Vanessa's point about, you know, social mobility, it's easy to get into labels and labeling people, but I come from a very working class background in Glasgow. 20 years ago, I wouldn't be where I'm at in a large financial services institution. Fact, right? When we were doing, I love this quote, and when we were doing Black Lives Matter month last year in HSBC, we invited a young man who spoke about, I think his organization is called something like Colour in Tech. He was very engaging, but somebody in the HSB audience said, we need more beacons, not tokens. And that has really stuck with me. And that's the modeling of the behavior that we have to get right as leaders. And if you don't celebrate diversity as a leader and allow it to flourish, and more than that, proactively and gently, and it is a gentle correction when you see it being stifled, personally, I think you're failing your job as a leader. Let me give you an example. If somebody comes up with a point of view and we all work in organizations, back to your rat race comment, right, about, those heavily tiered organizations where level is important. Well, I'm sorry, it's not, to Vanessa's point. If people have got a different experience and a different lens, that voice has to be heard. If you're sitting in an environment where that voice tries to speak and is that euphemistic management style we've all experienced, is quietly told to shut up, and you don't intervene as a leader, you have missed it, and you have modeled exactly the wrong behavior. And in that one intervention, you've got an opportunity to say, I'll use Anita just because she's on the big screen at the moment. Anita was saying something there, and you allow that person to flourish, and what you indicate to everybody else in the room is voices matter. And the voice doesn't necessarily have to come from a senior voice. I love the phrase hippoism, H-I-P-P-O, highest paid person's opinion, right? That's nonsense, right? We need to kill hippoism. I love we'll talk later about all my little kind of jokey things, but seriously, you need to respect and understand it, because that's what makes work fun, to Anita's point. There is value in it. You can measure the value. I know you can. Last thing for me is 25 years ago, when I started, a bit longer actually, showing my bloody age, but when I started in this industry, you didn't get into a bank, you'll know this, Danny, you didn't get into a bank, particularly an investment bank, unless you came from an investment banking background, right? We're now proud of the fact that we're bringing people from different industries to disrupt the customer experience. Why? Because we need diversity. We cannot keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different bloody results, to quote old Albert Einstein, right? It really is bonkers. So I'm very passionate about it, as you can tell. But I think it's about how you model the behavior as a leader is crucial in this. It really is. I'll shut up.
No, and something just resonated with me, and I think Vanessa said it, and you said it, Michael. I didn't come from a graduate background. I came out of a failed footballing background, to be honest, and then ended up flipped into banking. And it's a slightly different question that's here, but it just begs the question for me is, when we're looking at hiring school leavers or graduates, are we applying this level of thinking now? Whereas when I was in the corporate world, you had to have a graduate or two to go and work in an RBS. Are banks or bigger corporates starting to change their level of thinking when it comes to hiring, particularly in the world that we're going into now, where opportunities are going to be few and far between for the younger generation? So, is that level of thinking changing at that level as well?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we're moving into a world where and we see it at a social level as well. Think about the debate about higher education now, right now, about its value for the student, or the family in which they come from, etc. Now, I do believe, however it happens, you have to remain. One of the things that's really important, which I'll come to later, is about being open and being curious. Openness and curiosity is not a function necessarily. In fact, you could almost argue the opposite. I can see the smile on your face, right? Is not a function of which university you went to, or indeed whether you went to a university at all. And diversity is embracing all of it and recognizing that there's room for everyone in that conversation. Sometimes we need highly analytical thinkers who come from perhaps a science or a maths or an engineering background, right? Because the problem has to be decomposed. Sometimes you need, it's the kind of idea of diversity itself and why we use things like social styles. We need analysts, we need drivers, we need expressives, we need amiables. We need that collective experience to bring something together, in my view.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll talk all day on this one. So Hardeep, I'd love to hear your views on this particular round, you know, diverse teams in your organisation, particularly with a Goldman Sachs lens.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this has already been covered, so I don't want to repeat anything that's been said, but I think the most important things that come to mind for me are really that thought leadership and innovative thinking that comes from diverse teams. Ultimately, when we think about people we have working in our firms, what is one of the top ways that we're going to be able to retain that talent? And I think that is if we have diverse thinkers at the table and we have diverse teams around us, employees are going to be more likely to want to stay and develop within that firm too.
Yeah, thank you. And Anita, did you wanted to say something? Just to add to it.
I wanted to pick up on that question of degrees and school leavers, because it's a topic that's just really resonating at the moment. I'm involved in the current review of fintechs, the government-sponsored review at the moment, and it's come up as a real topic of how do we teach people in a rapidly changing technology environment to add value. And the whole Google model is really gaining resonance, that it's not necessarily about a 3-year degree course, but it is about those bite-sized chunks of education. And it's created a lot of debate. And in and of itself, it drives a diverse opportunities. You can get school leavers involved in different ways of learning, of keeping their skills up to date. And that does apply to women who want to, or men who want to return to the workplace after a period away. So just having a different way of thinking about what learning is, to use Michael's phrase, in an incredibly agile environment, in and of itself, I think is opening up opportunities for diversity.
Yeah, completely. Yes,
can I just add to that? I think also for the people that are recruiting is just to think about where they are recruiting those youngsters from. You know, we've all seen a number of companies shift away from just hunting in the Russell Group universities. But again, there's this series of kids that never even got that far. But there are so many kind of not-for-profit, get my words out, organisations that are nurturing these communities of kids that are coming out of school, you know, helping them get started, helping them get access to corporates, and organisations have an opportunity to see these kids that would have been otherwise unseen, that bring so much value to organisations, the way that they think, they're entrepreneurial, their survival skills, there's so much there above a CV. So again, I mean, happy to kind of, if anyone's connecting me on LinkedIn, I promote these organisations all the time. But another thing that I would say is that when you do get these kids into your organisations, and I work with a number of schools as well, is, you know, we need to ensure that they feel included, back to my point earlier on, you know, that they are nurtured through that process. So I think there's a lot that we can do. Again, be innovative in your thinking as to where you're hunting for your talent. And also, once you've got those kids, grow them, make sure that they become the pipeline of your future leadership as well. So, you know, just a few bits I just want to add on.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks. And I guess a couple of questions, a question for Dan and Mike Kidd. Do you think organisations are limiting their potential? And it very links back to what the topic we were just talking about, is limiting their potential by hiring and promoting the same kinds of thinkers. So Mike Kidd.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo comments made by others on the panel already. I mean, I think cognitive diversity is really important. I think, speaking from personal experience, I mean, I learn and have learned from the people I've worked with throughout my career, and I've worked with a multitude of different individuals from different backgrounds and it's just made my work life really interesting. And I think there's studies I've read papers on it whereby, you know, it's proven that stronger performance comes from more cognitive diverse teams, financial performance as well. So I do think that organizations will limit their growth, their potential, if they're just hiring like for like. And I think there's more than one way of looking at problems. There's more than one ways of looking at issues. But if you're just going down or looking at the one-way lens, you're going to come up with the same solutions all the time. So you're not really going, as an organisation, you're not going to, or a team, you're not going to sort of grow or evolve or you know, be of interest for new talent coming through. I mean, people or you know, kids, graduates are looking for something different these days in terms of work and work life balance. You know, organisations that can evolve and can offer them something interesting, exciting, the chance to learn, are going to be the ones at the forefront of growth and securing these talent. And that, I just want to hark back to the point about sort of hiring graduates within financial services or other organisations where, you know, a 2-1 or a first is a necessity. I've always, as a recruiter, found that really frustrating because, you know, you speak to really strong, passionate people all the time, who haven't necessarily come through the red brick university route, but as an individual, they are going to be fantastic for an organisation, even if they haven't got the right technology skill set or whatever skill set. Now they've got the foundation from which they can grow and become really successful, but because they haven't ticked a box in a specific educational route, they will never be given a chance or a look in at some of these companies. And it's great to hear that you know, organisations are now addressing this and see that as a barrier that needs to come down in order for them to then hire and secure really good talent.
Yeah, thanks. And Dan, what's your views from Flux?
Totally echo Mike's comments, and I think Vanessa and Anita talked about it really eloquently well, that, you know, it's vital for an organization because it's about building adaptability. And, you know, the greater the cognitive diversity, the greater the backgrounds that you have in your organization, the more adaptable your organization is, and, you know, and the better prepared you will be to face the kind of unexpected challenges that we're having to face now, or that Vanessa was faced with, you know, back in 2008. So I think it's vital. And so I think, you know, we all agree that it is limiting for an organization sort of not having that diversity. And I think all organizations know that, you know, that's the truth. But the challenge is, you know, how do you increase your reach? How do you find people that you're not as well prepared, you know, or not used to trying to find? How do you cast your net sort of, you know, wider, you know, as Vanessa talked, but then once you've got those people, you know, within your organization, how do you create a culture that allows them to flourish and allows, you know, Vanessa, I think you said kind of, you know, let every voice be heard. And that's something that I think I, you know, really sort of resonate with, because, you know, one of the things we've worked really hard to do is to create a culture that doesn't have any of that hierarchy, that doesn't have, you know, the hippo effect, that, you know, allows every voice to, you know, to be heard, and every opinion has exactly the same weighting until we've got evidence that, you know, that proves fact out of those opinions. So I think it's really, you know, really important. And it's great to see so many people chiming in on the chat. So, you know, Duncan Brown as well, you know, it is about, you know, nurturing that talent, you know, giving them, you know, useful paths, and just creating the space for debates to be had. I think one of the challenges, especially now when we're moving at such, you know, pace, having to in such a reactive mode to something like sort of COVID, you know, how do you then also create the space for the right conversations, the right debates to be had, to find the, you know, to identify the right problems and find the right solutions to those problems.
And I guess there's a question, and it could be to Michael, in terms of when we're on the topic of, you know, the different types of thinkers and cognitive diversity, how much education has to go in at the top level of companies now? Because as soon as you commit to something and communicate it, you're measured on basically doing what you said you would do. So how are companies now starting to effectively do what they said they're going to do? Because it's all well and good in words, but is there something that are they being measured externally now or by shareholders around this type of topic?
I don't think we're at the point where we're seeing, my personal view is shareholders aren't measuring it yet, if I'm really honest, right? But I think, and funnily enough, I was thinking of writing some sort of idea on this and sharing it on. I've not thought about the platform yet, but it occurred to me about 6 months ago, the dissonance and the days of how many people on this call have ever gone somewhere because a senior person said, this is our strategy, I'd like everyone to fall in behind it and execute it, please. It's a fallacy, right? The dissonance between those old hierarchical models of making statements up here and people enacting is, I think, is disappearing fast. So while I don't think shareholders and other external stakeholders are driving it, I think that dissonance is becoming increasingly apparent inside organizations. So if you're an authentic leader, the thing has to start with belief in what you're saying and your own authentic, bringing your own authentic self to work. By the way, that's a shift in the last 20 to 30 years, right? And one of the things that we did a year and a half ago that I was very proud of is we ran these ways of working sessions across digital, because what we were trying to do was pretty challenging and it brought out some pretty challenging behaviors. And in the execution of that, we noticed that some people were really struggling, and that's because some people are deeply uncomfortable with that level of, of conflict. So we were trying to figure out how to work through that. But back to your question, I'll come back to that point later if we have time. So I think there's a dissonance and a recognized dissonance between what a board says or what an exco says and what happens on the ground. And I think what we're trying to do now is close that gap, and you close that gap by acting on it. It's your deeds, not your words. Your words are important and you have to believe them, or people can see, like you can touch authenticity. It's hard to define, but you can see when it's not there, right? And then the question is, are you backing that up with deeds? So when you say diversity is important, can you point to the metrics? Now, we're working hard on that at the moment. Nowhere near good enough today, but I know we take it seriously, and I know we look at it through multiple lenses every time we're making a promotion decision or a hiring decision. We do look at it now in a way that we wouldn't have 5 years ago, I think. So it's changing.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Michael's point. I think that, it's so important to be deliberate in those actions. I think, ultimately what we're, trying to create is muscle memory, and that has to be trained. So having those metrics in place allows you to just, be deliberate about those actions, to bring it to the forefront of everyone's minds and make sure that it's, it becomes a forced part of conversations, to make sure that it then just becomes part of conversations.
Thank you. Sorry, Michael, did you want to just add one more point?
I think the muscle memory is so important. That ability to learn something through repetition, and everyone, cognitive diversity. People learn and consume information differently. Some people like to see it, read it, digest it, intellectualize it, then regurgitate it. Other people like to learn by doing, to Dan's point, and that, for me personally, I do a wee bit of both, but the rigor of making it such a habit. The way we'll change this is it becomes so habitual that the old models of the past seem, which most of us on this call already believe, they're antiquated and need changing or we wouldn't be here. But they are so, they become alien to the organizations we work in. That's muscle memory for me, Dan. I don't know if that's, the point you were making, but I love that as an idea. You just repeat and repeat and repeat, and it becomes so habitual in what you do.
Yeah.
I guess one final sort of question for this segment, and it's really for Hardeep here, is, we've had, I think everyone here's had a very, very challenging year. It's brought a number of real life issues to the forefront. And I think, we have to tackle a difficult subject, and I think it's worthwhile, raising the question. And Hardeep, how do you think organisations should really respond in the face of what we've experienced this year with the race crisis and Black Lives Matter?
Thanks, Danny. I think the most important crucial point here is making it really clear that there is no place for racism or discrimination in your organization. So that's got to be the top overriding message from leadership, so that it's really clear to everyone who actually works at the firm. The importance of listening to what's actually being said, and shared, creating those safe spaces for people to share their stories if they want to share, but appreciating that actually they might not want to. We actually at Goldman Sachs, I was really impressed with how things were handled, and I was a little bit concerned in that initial weekend when, you know, everything kicked off with George Floyd, and we heard about the death of George Floyd, and then we came to work on Monday, and I thought, gosh, we were in a virtual world, and I thought, if no one addresses this, I'll be really upset, because I had like a weekend of feeling really upset about it. And thankfully, you know, there were conversations everywhere, amongst leadership, amongst individual teams, amongst our networks. So some of our networks were putting on smaller roundtables for people to come together and discuss, but also leadership were putting on larger town halls, just to ensure that those who wanted to share stories were and could, but also really thinking about what else can we do? What is the most important thing here? And I think one of the most important things really is donating. So donating to those organizations who are supporting racial equality. So, you know, and that was a huge thing for us as well, just to ensure that these are the organizations. We had 5 organizations we had pledged to support. We set up a $10 million fund pretty much immediately after this happened to put the support into place, where employee donations were also matched. There were tons of resources that were available, whether it was counselling services or whether it's you know, flexibility or time off for people who needed it. So just making sure that all those you know, various resources were available for anyone who felt like they needed it at the time.
Vanessa, you're on mute.
That famous line, you're on mute. Just to add to that, you know, there are so many, there was a lot of companies at that particular time that came out with some pretty bold statements and stuff. One of the things I would say is that we can't lose momentum. You know, we came out the back of that over the summer, you know, with Black Lives Matter, George Floyd's murder. Then we went into Black History Month, like in October. You know, this should be, it's a 12-month calendar. So just to say to, you know, individuals that are recruiting and stuff like that and looking at to be more inclusive in that way, please let's not lose momentum on that topic. You know, there were so many resources out there. You know, we released books where you can educate yourself, you know, around being anti-racist. You know, there's so many different webinars and stuff like that. I just don't want, you know, it, like some things you see them kind of blow up in the D&I space and then they kind of disappear. I absolutely truly believe that this is one we should continue momentum on, you know, and there's companies even that I've worked with on this panel that have, you know, done things around kind of inclusion of Black and ethnic minorities for years, you know, but as I say, we just can't lose that spirit of good intention.
Would anyone else like to comment on this whilst we're here?
I would echo Vanessa's point, and yeah, it's about the momentum. We've been here before in terms of BAME and diversity and sort of really pushing that agenda, and it tends to sort of filter away. But you know, it's the whole issue. Well, the whole George Floyd situation has just brought it to the forefront with so much more power, I think, than we've had before. I think it's fantastic just to listen to Hardeep there and how Goldman Sachs have responded to the situation, because I thought about the question and how should organisations you know, really address this. And I've written engage with communities. You know, it's all about trying to set a level playing field, for me anyway, and give opportunities for individuals within these deprived areas that might not necessarily get the opportunities if nothing changes. And it's all linked, right? So sort of cognitive diversity, ethnic diversity, it's all interlinked. So it's a really important point. So sponsoring and providing finances is great. I mean, I worked at an organisation, UBS, who had a partnership with a local academy in a deprived area, and you know, it's just giving time to students to go and talk to them about sort of career opportunities or not even career opportunities, just sitting down and helping, listening to children speak or listening to children read. Very really small things that kids in deprived areas might not actually sort of get on a daily basis can make a massive difference to someone in their future life.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Dan, John.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, and I think a massive difference to organisations as well. I think it's only in those interactions that you realise the cognitive diversity that it can bring. We've been lucky enough to sort of work in the past with with kids from the Mayor's Fund sort of programme, and again, I've always been astounded by how they solve problems. And I thought I was cognitively diverse from others that I work with, but then the things that they're bringing up again from lived experience. But I think it's it is that we need to bring in, and as you say, it's only by being deliberate in creating the opportunities to get that insight that we really do allow ourselves to sort of move on. And and again, I think it's it's creating the platforms to bring tolerance into organisations, tolerance, greater tolerance into society generally as well.
And I think that everyone's on an educational path here, right? And I think Vanessa mentioned that there are books to read, and maybe if anyone has any recommendations that they want to share with people, put them into the chat room so other people could educate themselves if they feel necessary. I'm sorry, Hardeep, that you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that to say that I think it's about time we got uncomfortable and got comfortable with it. It's so important. Now is not the time to be silent. And, as Audre Lorde says famously, your silence is complicit. And we all need to remember that. And the more we have those conversations and have that feeling of discomfort, the better we're doing for all of us.
I would add to that, and the thing that has been amazing for me about Black Lives Matter is that it's given people almost permission to talk about it. So I'm used to, as a woman, often in a group of all male colleagues, partnerships tend to be pretty white and male. I'm used to being able to say this doesn't feel right as a woman. And what I've watched with Black Lives Matter is my BAME colleagues, particularly Black colleagues, stepping forward and saying, this is what it feels like to be Black in this organisation. And you know what? We rarely had those conversations before. And to your point, it's been confronting at times. I've had many conversations now about how does it feel, and shame on me had not fully understood those perspectives and have felt uncomfortable in those conversations. But that's the start of change, isn't it?
Absolutely. Is any? We're just running slightly behind on time, but I think it was worthwhile definitely spending additional time to discuss this particular topic. I think what we're going to do now, if we break for 5 minutes, just to give everyone a bit of time, and then get back together in, if we can say 10 to 1, where we'll really start to talk about the impact of diversity. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Danny. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
I thought that was really interesting, Hardeep. I think that's one of the things for me that you just think, what people need to talk about it. That's what that's the problem. But it's very British, isn't it? We're sort of very uncomfortable talking about things that we might offend people. Or I know even myself though, if you do take a step into that world, you do open yourself up for a bit of criticism, don't you? And that's.
And rightly, I mean, certainly rightly on my part, our parts, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, it's opening ourselves up to those on the things that we are just so unconscious of, and and again, until we're having those conversations, there isn't that awareness, and I think that's the challenge. Is as a panel, we're all here because we're passionate about those things, but we're still too much.
But we're all still laced with biases, aren't we?
Yeah.
And good ones and bad ones. I believe. I didn't go to university. I believe that I've got more grit than others. And I have that filter when I go through it. It's just you can't help yourself.
Yeah, can I pick up on Dan's point, because when we were talking and I was listening to the debate, and I'll post on the room a couple of things. It's not quite in the same arena, Hardeep, but there's an organization called the Singularity University that I really rate, and they talk about cognitive diversity and getting uncomfortable. And your phrase about getting uncomfortable in a race situation is just the same, right? And it fits with the broader topic. But the thing that was occurring to me when we were all talking is we're a group of like-minded people, and the word was integration in our lives, but we're the converts. I don't mean we're perfect, I don't mean, but we believe in this and we want to drive the change. The real challenge is people who don't want to integrate diversity into their lives and want to compartmentalize it, right? And I think that's the shift, the dynamic in politics at the moment at a geopolitical level, where there's a movement of integration that you can't separate, you shouldn't separate. To Anita's point, you know, this is what it feels like to be a person of color, you know, in an organization like this, versus people who want to say, no, just keep that bloody out of work, you know, and that's how you reinforce the stereotypes of the old. Too big to get into today, but a worthwhile topic, I feel, debating, because we'll self-select, right? We all self-select on this. The people who are attending it self-select because they're interested and passionate.
Yeah, exactly.
We're trying to reach out to a different group here.
Yeah, like preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
But that's why you're trying to find that. That's why I'm trying to hone down on the benefits, because how are you going to convince people is, what's the return on investment? What is it going to matter to my bottom line? Like, a lot of the decision makings are made on that benefit. But I totally agree. How do you reach those people that aren't converted?
Do you know what, Gemma? It shouldn't be like that. Okay, and now I think there is a different turning point when you have conversations. I mean, as an organisation like mine that relies on corporate sponsorship, you know, before those conversations were, what exposure are we getting? You know, how can we recruit these women? It was all very commercial. The conversations I have with my sponsors now are very much, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. You know, we want to see more intersectional women, and I make a point of using that word intersectional women, because it's all well and good people saying, oh yeah, we're making great traction on gender. Unless those women are intersectional gender, we're not addressing the full picture. So my conversations with sponsors are shifting to around, we're doing this because we want to be part of something that, yes, obviously we want to get our brand out there as employers of choice of women, but the scales have gone like that, you know, in terms of what they actually want to get out of the relationship and why they're doing it. So I think sometimes people have to go in with that mindset as well, you know, and again, look at the organisations that they can support. And I agree with Michael's point about preaching to the converted. You know, when we run our big conferences for women, we don't tend to talk about the lack of women at the top, because they know that we're all part of the problem, you know. So when we're doing a tech conference, we're talking to them about tech as if they were men technologists. Should be no different, you know. So I think it's shifting that mindset. And again, a lot of these groups we get together, we all get it. We're all passionate about it. The big nub is, how do we get to those that don't think this is important, or that don't lend their voice towards change? That's the challenge.
It is.
And do you think it's because it's the protection of existing power bases that's kind of causing that? I mean, certainly when the work that we do, when we see, you know, a resistance to change, it's often because people feel that they've got something that they're going to lose as a result of it, and can't grasp the opportunity.
I don't know. I see that in some things. I think sometimes we're paying a bit of a price for our generation as well. You know, I talk to the youngsters, and you know, who live in a completely different world to what we do. And I think come 5 or 10, 20 years, some of those ones with archaic views that will nod and talk a good game, but actually walk out the room and do nothing, you know, we will kind of rinse them out of our organisations. And the ones that kind of do get it, and the youngsters that absolutely get it, will kind of rise up from the top. But we've got to nurture that talent with that mindset, that inclusive mindset, and ensure that we continue to do that if we're going to see the organisations we want to see in the future.
Yeah,
I think organisations need to change. You can't change behaviour and attitude without impacting some of the structures that we live and breathe, the way we promote. And I know we're going to come on and talk about that, but I think that's really fascinating, that it's it's not just enough to say it, the wider environment needs to change.
Yeah.
And I think you come back to Hardeep's point about making people uncomfortable. Some people will hold on to it for power-based reasons, Dan, I guess, right? But as humans, we're programmed, you know, not many people like to be uncomfortable.
No.
This is uncomfortable. So guess what? It's easier to sit in your safe, you know, comfort, even though it's wrong, than to push it out. You know, it's, I genuinely think a lot of it is, that's why I loved your muscle memory point, right?
Yeah.
I think it will become so, 20 years from now, we'll look back on it, hopefully. Mind you, we were saying that in the 60s about, you know, that. So, you know, be careful of prophesizing a happy future. I'll shut up because it's dangerous.
And I just think to add something that I see more and more is the integration between your social and your work environment now. And I think, you know, just corporate used to be, you had your corporate work person and then you had your outside of work person. And now, for me, those lines are really start to disappear, right?
That is so true.
I think,
yeah,
I think
it really is.
Yeah, so you go first.
No, I was just going to say, you know, and it used to be that that's the person that you would be in work. And actually, the person that you would be in work and the person that you are now here is just you. And if you're comfortable being you, then you should feel that that's okay. And when you go into work, you're you. And I just think it's a significant mindset shift in companies to go, actually, you're just normal. You all go home. You all are just normal people. And I just think there's we're in that change of cycle of thinking as business and leaders nowadays.
We're not putting on those literal suits of armor anymore, are we?
no.
Because we all dressed in our corporate way, and you became that person. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I really like that.
Renil Bottage, who's head of data, who's head of analytics at HSBC. So Renil is an Aussie like Anita, and he's Sri Lankan by birth, or at least his parents are Sri Lankan. And he tells this really powerful story when we're doing the ways of working across, you know, HSBC, that he was trained 20 years ago. No, leave all that stuff. There's a big organization in Australia that used to train people in the corporate world. You leave that persona, your real persona, you leave at the door, and you bring this different persona to work. And how ridiculous is that?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think we're all talking a lot about inclusion, really creating like a safe space where everyone can talk, and it's the most inclusive. And I think when we talk about D&I, we forget that the I should be the big bit in the D&I. You know, once you create an inclusive environment, diversity tends to lend itself. So it's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I jumped in there.
We're going to go on to the next part, but I want to read a comment, and I'm going to read a comment from someone that's put on here, because I think it is a very powerful comment, and I don't necessarily think everyone wants to debate the comment, but I think it's so important that SC Hardy has mentioned, and I don't think we should ignore that. SC's, if everyone's okay for me to read it out. I'm a disabled Black woman, and I think I have a great opportunity to go into meetings and say, well, I identify as being Black and I identify as being a woman, but I also identify as being disabled. Where is this in the conversation? I think if we can be brave and say things like that, it will move the conversation forward. I think that was, I just wanted to read that because I felt it was such a powerful statement.
That is so powerful.
And this is my point about intersectional women. So Essie covers, you know, she is an intersectional woman. So it's making sure that all the different characteristics and the facets of her as an individual are appreciated, acknowledged, and that she feels included in that room. So I agree, Essie, a really, really powerful comment. From my perspective, intersectionality is the forefront of what we've been doing at We Are the City. We've had many different events. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, I can point you in the direction. There's some research that we're just about to publish as well that will hopefully guide companies, you know, on how to look at that intersectionality, because, you know, we can't all just be put into one box. You know, I'm not a fan of labels either, but, you know, that's tend to be how it's been in the past, where, you know, when you do cross those different intersectional boundaries, you know, as a woman and even as a man, you know, there are different things, different ways that those individuals need to be supported. So Dan, you can probably come in it from a male perspective, you know, having those different characteristics as well. But absolutely, that is at the forefront of my particular conversation. And even I know for International Women's Day that we're already looking at for 2021, and there's various themes around that. But one of the banks that I work with is actually saying no to the themes that are out, and intersectionality will be the theme for their IWD and all of their events. So do connect with me on that, because again, a big kind of passion of mine and stuff we're doing some work on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ness. So a bit late, but let's go into the next section, which is about impact. Now, the whole thing is about impact of diversity. Let's be clear. So, so one of the questions is how do we recruit for diversity, and how could we learn from it in that regard? So, Hardeep, your views on recruiting for diversity.
Yeah, sure. And this is something that I feel very passionately about. So I think importantly, casting as wide a net as possible in terms of going to where the talent is, making sure we are present in the right job boards, whether that be women, Black talent, LGBT, or people with disabilities, really having that presence and covering all the various strands with that intersectional approach. The partnerships are so important, thinking about who you partner with, and this is agencies and it's vendors as well. So agencies, this is why I work with Elysian, because they share the same values that I share and the firms that I've worked for have shared. But also We Are the City with Vanessa. I've loved working with Vanessa and We Are the City over the years because of what they stand for. And I think that's so important, because if you're working with an agency or a vendor who aren't really passionate about the same things that you are, then it's a downward slope and it's not going to work really. I think really thinking about how important it is to speak to our employees and our employee network groups, because we all know that referrals are the best way to actually recruit talent. So speak to those, diverse employee groups about referrals as well. And then, I'm going to mention a couple of things that we've done very specifically at Goldman Sachs that I think have worked recently. One is partnerships with organizations such as Upreach and SEO, so Sponsors of Educational Opportunity, and that's making sure that we're also going to those underrepresented groups, and we're working with people who come from that social mobility background as well, because that's imperative. Whilst we talk about education and degrees and who we're not actually including in these conversations, we've got to let it be known that actually we are a firm that want to reach out to those people too. We recently launched a Career Pivot series, which is a 5-week program with 5 modules across 5 weeks. The whole aim of this series was to educate and upskill participants. So participants had the opportunity to sign up, and then they had access to a whole educational series of putting together your best CV, acing your interviews, how to network effectively, and then learning very specifically about different divisions and sectors, so they have that knowledge, and then guaranteeing them a first stage interview after that. So and this was very much aimed at making sure we're going out hitting all the strands of diversity, that we are attracting diverse talent to the firm. And I think that's been something that's been really successful for us. And something slightly out the box, we also have something called an Africa Recruiting Initiative, where every year we go out to Africa in 3 different cities. So this is Kenya, Nigeria and Ghana, and actually work with talent in Africa, and look to ensure that they are, we're working with them on their CVs, on interview best practices, on other tools that they may need, and then offering them the opportunity to interview as well, in particular in our engineering space. So I've mentioned quite a lot there, but I think it's really important that we do go as wide as possible when we're thinking about recruiting diverse talent.
Thanks, Hardeep. Mike, is there anything you want to add to that, Mike?
Yeah, with my recruiter hat on, when it comes to diversity, I think that the sooner that you engage with your partners around your diversity strategy, the more successful and the bigger impact they will have. Throughout my career, I've worked with organisations who have been or have been very proactive, should we say, in terms of sort of diversity, and it's been amazing. But some firms who are very reactive, and something like Black Lives Matter, they'll look at themselves and say, well, actually, you know, we look at you know, BAME representation in our organisation, and it's nowhere near where we want it to be. So now we're going to go out and speak to some agencies to say we want to hire X amount of BAME individuals with Y skills. Go find them for us. Which, you know, is a very difficult job, very difficult task to succeed in. You know, working for and with Elysian and with Gemma, who Heidi has quite rightly said is really passionate about this subject. You know, when you're engaged at a strategic standpoint, and you understand where an organisation is trying to get to, it's easier for you then over the course of 12 months or however long this strategy runs for, to truly represent this organisation to the networks that they're trying to reach, have the right story, be able to attract the talent over a longer term, because you know, these things are a longer term play, right? It's very difficult to address either diversity or ethnicity recruitment over a very short period of time. So just that really, being engaged at an early stage in a process makes it so much easier and makes it so much more powerful in terms of going out and speaking to the right individual to try and attract them to these organisations.
And can I just pick up on the networking side of things, because, you know, they make very, very valid points there around ERGs. I mean, there are I think it was 2 years ago, I did a talk to 50 recruiters at LinkedIn. You know, there are 2,000 women's networks in London alone that we're aware of. You know, there's a directory on We Are the City of 350 of them. There is a women in everything, right? So I'm talking from a gender perspective here. But one of the things I said to those recruiters, you know, go and build relationships. LinkedIn isn't the only place where you can go and to be quite frankly, I'm going to be a bit bold, it's a bit lazy. You know, when we're all allowed out to play again, go and hang out with some of these women's networks, attend their events, build relationships strategically for the long term. Wherever you're recruiting, even if you think, you know, I always get asked, where's the women in tech? Well, I've got a database of 40,000 of them. I run events for them every single day. There are women in tech. So where are the women in investment banking? Again, there's a network of women there. So yeah, wherever you're looking to hire, wherever you're looking to source people, you can go and build those relationships as well. That, you know, the world is your oyster in terms of all these different alignment groups. And just back to Hardeep's point, you know, going through your employee relationship groups. I mean, I run Gender Networks, which is 95 firms. Every company that's on this panel is part of that, you know, and they are a great conduit for recommendation, you know, when you're recruiting and stuff like that. So use the own internal people that you've got as well. So just want to say about just around the networks, it's so important if you want that diversity of talent to look at some of those ERGs. And if you haven't got one, come talk to me. I'll help you set one up.
So leading that on from, I guess, from there's the recruitment piece, but then from the employer side, and a question to Anita really is, has diversity and inclusion ever been part of a job description or expected responsibilities of an individual? And if not, do you think it should be?
I feel really torn on this one. So I have been for a long time an advocate of targets, because going back to the whole muscle memory question, most leaders in the sort of business I work in are totally focused on targets. So if there's not a target around it, it doesn't happen. So I'm all one for targets. And so is it part of my job description? Yeah, it's part of every partner's job description, and I'd hazard a guess it is across all of the partnerships, to get a certain number of women in partner roles, for example. But you've got to admit it's been pretty unsuccessful, because I still walk into a room and I'm surrounded by 4 out of 5 on average men. So it is part of our job descriptions. My issue is, how important is it? And it comes back to what we're talking about, authenticity and the culture in an organization. Because what happens is that, yes, it's part of your year-end measures, but if something more important comes up, like a big deal or something else, that goes out of the window and you follow the money. And until businesses reconcile the two, until they understand you can't have one without the other, then those token, because we've used the word token in this session before, those token measures are worthless. So yes, I've had a lot of token measures in my job descriptions, but I think that we are all as an industry getting to a point where it just needs to be more systemic than that, and that's what this panel is representing, I think.
Yeah, such a good point. Does anyone else want to add to that?
I guess I'd echo Anita's comments that, you know, it's, I think, again, especially in sort of, I guess, consulting sort of fields where, you know, where that cognitive diversity is so important to your ability to solve problems, it kind of is part of everyone's role, you know, without sort of being specifically sort of there, and you know, but I do think that, you know, that challenge of reconciling, you know, the not always financial, but broadly, you know, very often the financial targets and performance measures that, you know, that people are rewarded based on, you know, do encourage a very different behavior to, you know, to you know, what are probably still deemed as, you know, softer measures and softer targets. And, you know, again, it comes back to, you know, being deliberate, having measures, you know, are really, really powerful in just starting to, you know, to move you along. But, you know, what's going to, you know, there's a question of what is going to accelerate that, you know, and I think until it becomes a more of a harder measure, it's difficult to do that.
I know I'm not supposed to speak, but I just feel because obviously particularly passionate about this part of the topic.
I was only going to add, and it links to the muscle memory point that Dan raised, is success measured on this is when it stops being a goal. You don't have a goal when you get up to brush your teeth in the morning. You get up and brush your teeth in the morning, right? It's something that you just do, right? And it is success when that muscle memory is built down, where when it no longer becomes a goal, it is just something that you do, and you don't have to measure it. Gemma, sorry, I had to get that.
I agree with that. I just think we're quite a long way off the point of it being muscle memory. And I think the reason for that is we need to be proactive in our ability to address diversity, and that recruitment, obviously a topic that I know a lot about, is a reactive business. You react to what the clients want in the moment that they want it. And we are used as servers to that, which is understandable, but it's a business model that doesn't promote change or transferable skills. I think that the time where we will solve diversity problems is when we look at what are transferable skills from one industry to another. And when we assess people against that, so it's not just what background do they come from, because if we're only taking the same types of people from the same talent pool, but it's not there already because we haven't educated that talent pool, how the hell do we ever change anything? So I think that the biggest thing for me is being proactive in every area.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add to the recruitment discussion? So I'm going to move on to the next question. Really for everyone, right, and a good one to discuss is, what are the biggest barriers and potential solutions in achieving diversity in an organisation? Because we've talked about the recruitment piece, but actually internally now, what are the biggest barriers? And I guess, Mike, you know, do you want to start that view?
Yeah, it probably sort of harks back to Anita's point, whereby the business and the bottom line would usually come first. So that is for me, from the experience that I've had working inside some of these large scale financial services organizations. I mean, the theory and the want and desire to do things correctly is always there. You have your I suppose your internal functions who set sort of recruitment agendas or set diversity agendas, and they're probably 1 or 2 steps away from the front line where people are actually toiling away trying to build the revenue. And so if you give someone targets to say we need to hit X amount of sort of female candidates per candidate slate, or we need to increase our BAME representation in this team, yet they have a stakeholder who's shouting at them saying, I need you to deliver this piece of work for me and it needs to be done in the next 6 months. We need to hire 2 or 3 people to do it. They're usually going to hark back and say, well, we just need people quickly. And when you're hiring people quickly, it doesn't really give you the opportunity, certainly from a recruiter perspective, to reach maybe the networks of individuals that you want to reach, or that are sort of more diverse. It might take a slightly longer incubation period to get interested in a role, or to talk about a specific organisation that maybe they haven't really thought of previously. So for me, that's one of the biggest barriers. Actually. People delivering and having that the target of delivering something to stakeholders against a target that might come from a different part of an organisation that is 1 or 2 steps away, if that makes sense.
Anyone else want to add to that around the barriers that they're seeing in organisations that they're working with?
Yeah, again, I think we're doing a lot of echoing sort of everyone's comments, which is always good on a panel like this. But I think I don't use it so much in this area, but I think that it does kind of resonate that there's a tendency to do things for vanity purposes. So there's a need to be seen, to be taking measures because there are potential headlines to be had, or shareholders to try and appease, which kind of keeps it at a bit of a superficial level. And I think we talked a lot about the culture of being able to foster and nurture the right sorts of talent. And I think it's it's very easy to sort of look at it at the veneer level, but actually the hardest thing is transforming cultures, the culture in organizations to create those safe spaces, to create the right level of tolerance, to address the tension between driving business units that been traditionally sort of driven by very sort of hard KPIs, and and allowing some of those to diversify with with the teams that are in them as well.
And I would add a colleague of mine, an amazing female partner, challenged a male colleague recently on his networks. So we all have our support networks, and she challenged him to, when was the last time you turned to get diverse advice? When did you instinctively turn to a woman or turn to a Black colleague to get advice, as opposed to just getting it from your usual support group? And I think that consciously challenging within an organization is absolutely critical to enable diversity across the whole organization. We've all got to have the courage to lean in, to use that hackneyed phrase, but to actually challenge, call out what's going wrong. I love the beacons, not tokens phrase that somebody used earlier, because until we do that, it's not going to happen by accident. It needs to be a conscious change. And that goes through, it's not just about recruitment, although we're obviously here from a recruitment perspective, but it is about growing people's careers. It's about unlocking promotion opportunities and in a diverse model, and consciously taking risks, and then just challenging the wrong behaviors. There's no silver bullet here, because if there were, we'd have fired it.
And I think it's getting away from that sense of once and done.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Essie made the point really brilliantly. We're trying to build muscle memory to to solve the challenges today, but as soon as we've solved those, we do need to move on to the next, and the job will never be done.
And can I just add to the point of just around what needs to be done? That sounds like a very kind of practical, tangible, one-time action. for me, where I've seen most success, and again, as I say, no, we deal with 150 different companies. I've not seen anyone get it right. Some good stuff, but no one's kind of got it right. But it's just making sure that, you know, that all our inclusion and diversity efforts are embedded in business as usual. They're embedded in the business. I mean, lots of my colleagues and friends are all heads of D&I, that they wish for a day where their job doesn't exist. You know, where we haven't got to do this big campaign to address this particular characteristic or this particular gender or stuff like that, because it's normal to us. But as you say, we're a country mile away from there. But how can we embed that inclusion and that diversity in everything we do? And I think that's the lens that we all need to wear. And for senior management that do have the voice and do have the power, and let's put it, some of this is put your money where your mouth is, you know, to mobilize these things, that is constant. It's not just, I say, that one-off practical, let's do this today. It's all the time. It's embedded in every process, everything that we do, you know. And there's been some great kind of, just on the gender side, the 30% Club released their report around, and I remember the stat off the top of my head, but, you know, just looking at businesses, looking through the lens of gender, you know, around their female customers and how much that would add to GDP, you know, and how much businesses were missing out on. So there's a lot of stuff, not just around gender, but on lots of different things around why this is good for business, you know, for those that we have to preach a little bit harder to. But for me, the silver bullet is when all this is embedded in BAU and leaders, you know, just think about it as they would do their bottom lines, their P&Ls and everything else. It's just, that's the way it should be.
So, Hardy, was you going to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, many of you may have heard the term that if there's only one woman or diverse candidate in your candidate pool, let's say in a candidate pool of 4, statistically, there's 0% chance of that candidate being hired. So this is a fact from the Harvard Business Review, and I'd really say, please do look it up as well, because it's so great when you look at the stats and you see, you know, 0 women, 1 woman, 2, 3, 4. So, I mean, one of the things that we've introduced recently, which I think is one of the ways that we can try and overcome this, is a rule of 2. So for every hire that we make, you have to ensure that you have interviewed at least 2 diverse candidates. So it's not enough to say, oh yeah, actually I interviewed a woman and she didn't get through. You have to make sure that you've got 2 diverse candidates there. So it's like thinking about things like this. Vanessa mentioned earlier, thinking about innovative ways in which we can improve our processes and in which we can hire. So it's thinking of ways that are outside of the normal ways we would do things, but making sure that they are followed and making sure that we have that alignment from leadership as well.
Now I'm on mute. I'm conscious of time, and we wanted to do a Q&A. So I think that what I'll do now is we'll look at open up to a Q&A. If anyone wants to raise questions, please do so now. There's a couple that are in the Q&A box I'm going to bring into my screen. One is from Mary, and I don't know if anyone's answered that. How do you create action around disability, both physical and visible? This seems to me still to have a very significant social barriers in employment based on my lived experience after 28 years in payment software as a wheelchair user, working class and female. Has anyone got some thoughts on that? Happy to read it again.
Dan, I mean, around thoughts around it, I know an organisation that's been trying to do, that works with a number of different companies to raise the aspect of disability, which unfortunately is often one of the areas of diversity that is not necessarily in the forefront. And that is a lady called Kate Nash at Purple Space. So Purple Space run a very similar thing to my kind of gender networks, where it's the heads of the internal disability networks within firms that come together to share best practice. So there was a whole report, I think, that Purple Space did around kind of tangible actions that companies could use to be more inclusive around disability and hidden disability as well. So that's just like more of a resource than anything else. Perhaps some of the others can kind of talk to how they've addressed it, but definitely something to look at.
Any thoughts from anyone?
Yeah.
Are there any other questions that we've got for our panel? I'm just looking through all of the comments, which have been fantastic. I've got a question, if that's okay, and it's sort of directed to a bit of everyone. If I gave you a magic wand and we're sitting a year from now and we could make one change, what would that change be for each of you? It doesn't have to be you. So Hardeep, is there anything that's the one thing that you want to see looking forwards in the future before we move on to the next bit?
I think it's just seeing more inclusive behaviours amongst us all. You know, I mentioned earlier about speaking up when something's not right. So being brave, being brave to actually speak your mind, especially when you don't think that something is right.
Brilliant, thank you. Anita?
I think we need to continue to, it's about the role modelling. I'd like to see more celebration of success. And I think Vanessa does a great job on this. And I just think that there's more that we all could do within firms, certainly firms like my own, to just celebrate the success and on the other side, maybe call out the people who aren't pulling their weight.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, I guess that everybody sees that there are opportunities, you know, and I think that, you know, there are clear pathways to those. I think a lot of the barriers are down to, you know, people's ability or desire to put effort in, and I think, you know, just making it feel more effortless would be the magic wand for me.
Mike?
Mine similar to Hardeep and Dan. It's just having a more inclusive society. I think would just help everybody. You know, things of politics has been so divisive over the last sort of few years, and for me personally, I don't know how everyone else feels, but I think it's just set us back a few years in terms of understanding and being sort of open, shall we say, about individuals with different backgrounds and people who are different to you and having different ideas. You know, I think if we had a more inclusive and open society, I think you know, the world would be a better place. Organisations would automatically be more diverse, and you know, hopefully that's what everyone is striving to towards anyway.
Right. Vanessa?
I'm with everyone else, right? A more accepting society to difference, a more inclusive society. I think that's something that we all want, but also we've all got a massive part to play in that, Dan, in terms of calling it out, you know, and again, sometimes that's uncomfortable as well. And again, to the divisive point, we've seen that around politics, around racism. We've seen so many kind of the ugly side of society. So for me, kind of seeing, just to live in a world where everyone who is, I hate using the word different, but you know, everyone has their individuality celebrated and can be successful as the next person.
And finally, Gemma.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone said here. I think it's not, I'm like quite a solutions person, so kind of living in a world that's much more accepting. I think everyone around this room would feel the same, but it's like, how do you get there? We're talking more about it now than we've ever talked about it before, and yet the movement forward is not maybe at the speed and rate that we would all want it to see. I think I echo what Anita said about, and what Vanessa does. Role modeling is one of the most successful ways of being more inclusive. Showing people that you can do, showing all different walks of life that you can be successful is the best way of setting people on that challenge. And then also going into schools, going into places and telling them what careers are out there. Like, we live in quite a vantage position where you can see jobs around you. Imagine if your world is much more sheltered than that and you can't see these different opportunities. I think we've got a responsibility to shout about opportunity as well as trying to be more inclusive.
Brilliant. It's been an unbelievable topic and an unbelievable panel. I guess for me, just listening to everyone's thoughts and opinions, and I'll be open and honest, I've got a huge amount to learn and we all have. But for me, it's opened my eyes up to the learnings that I need to take on board. I think one person that I learned a huge amount from over the last few months is my son, who's a 15-year-old year 11 student, who some of these topics don't even exist in their world because they are so educated. And in fact, you could bring a 15-year-old year 11 student into some of the companies who could educate us on diversity and inclusion, because my son educated me hugely in his space, and I found it very, very enlightening. So maybe the people that we need to look to are not far away from ourselves. But for me, it's been an unbelievable panel, and I'm really grateful, Gemma, for you to ask me to host this. And we're going to go into a virtual networking session now. But again, thank you to everyone. I know Michael had to drop off, but it's been really an honour. So I think Paul is just going to join us now for a virtual networking session. So thank you.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
Great moderating, mate.
Thanks, Gemma.
And thanks,
for having us.
Anita. Thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it.
I actually can't stay for the network. I'm really sorry, but please.
Oh,
come
you
Bye.
must try it at some point with us, like properly have a good time, because it is quite a fun place to go with a glass of wine there whilst we're in virtual world.
That is tempting, but sadly, clients call.
No, not now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Anika.
Bye.
Bye.
So yeah, hi everyone, and thanks again from me to all the panelists. It was a really great session. I'm just going to pop up a couple of slides quickly, so hopefully that should be appearing on your screen now. That was a great Zoom session. Zoom is great if you've got talking between sort of one-to-one, or like this, where you've got each one of the panel taking a turn to chat. But that's not how we live. We're social animals. We chat with each other in groups normally. Which is a very different kind of interaction. What we've got for you to try, and this is quite new, but as we all learned yesterday, we're working from home until April next year, so there's a bit longer to go, is a very different way to start to interact. What we're trying to do is use different types of extended reality or virtual reality to get around how we can get communication that's just a lot more human. So we have something for you to try out today called V Together. It's a much more social experience. You don't need to download anything. You don't need a headset. We do also work with that kind of full-on immersive VR as well, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to take you into a world where you're going to look like one of these little characters on the left. You'll be able to move around using your cursor keys, and you can walk up to other people in there. And when you get close to them, the cameras will fade in and you'll be able to chat, just as we would in the real world. The only thing I want to say is you'll need to quit Zoom before you start to use this, because it needs to use your camera, and you can't use your camera in two places at once. So I'm just going to stick up a link in the chat. That's the link there if you are a fast typist. But I'll stick it in the chat right now. If you just click on that, it'll take you through a little bit of an introduction, and then there's a big button with a finger pointing at it that says "Let me in," and hopefully we will see you all there in a few minutes' time. So I'll just go into the chat now if I can find it, and I'll put in that link. I'll stop the screen sharing.
And I guess for
There we
Zoe,
go.
who's hosting it, if Zoe can host it, just leave maybe that in there for a few seconds so people
Yeah,
can
exactly.
copy and paste it.
Yeah, so if you just click on the link in the chat, it'll take you through. And it doesn't take you straight in. So click on that link, you open up that screen, come back here, shut down Zoom, and we'll see you there in a few minutes. Any closing words from you, Gemma or Danny?
Not from me. I'm looking forward to jumping into the networking booth now.
Yeah, I mean, come up and talk to me directly, hopefully, in the networking space. I quite like the unopportune meetings, but thanks so much for everyone dialing in, as always. It's such a passionate topic. We will do a run through for everybody and send it all via email or on our social networking things of all the books and comments and vehicles that people mentioned today. So we'll follow up with everybody with that. See you on the virtual side. There's a pub there apparently, so see you there.
Thanks, Gemma. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.